Today, I'm going to be updating you on the status of the grafts that I did 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 3 months ago, and 6 weeks ago. Now, the ones that you see right behind me here, please pardon the roosters, but they get a little excited whenever I start doing videography. The grafts that you see that I've done right here, most of these were done 3 months ago, back in the early spring. I've got some lessons learned. I did some of these grafts on M27. I've got a couple in here. M27 is a rootstock, is a very dwarfing rootstock. We'll go ahead and talk about that. M27 is a very dwarfing rootstock, means that the plant will only get about 7-8 foot tall, but it produces a lot of fruit and a nice sized fruit. So that's some of the good aspects if you're wanting a small plant that produces a lot. The drawback is that in our area, we're very susceptible to fire blight. M27 doesn't do very well in our area, and I can tell because compared to the ones that I did 3 months ago, which are right here, to some of the ones that I've done 6 weeks ago, the ones that we did 6 weeks ago on a different rootstock seem to be doing much better. Now, if I pull an M27, and this one's got shell that has been grafted to it, you see about how much growth that I have from this bud tip up. Now down here is the rootstock. We're not worried about rootstock. We'll eventually end up trimming this off. So I did this graft back in the early spring, back in the middle of March. I'll bend that down. You can see that the rubber bands are already deteriorated. They're falling off. This graft union is healed. Looks pretty good, and it was starting to push growth up here. But it's not too vigorous. It's not pushing a lot of growth compared to some of our others. So I'll put M27 down. You see how that's doing. And then I'll grab one from 969 that was grafted at the same time. This is a rootstock that produces a taller tree, about 3/4 the size of a full-size tree. But you see how much growth from this top bud right here all the way up. I probably have 18 inches worth of growth. This tree is ready to go in the ground. If I want to put it in the ground or sell it, you know, I could sell it for a little small price, and this one's ready to go. So some lessons learned on that. Also, I did some pear grafts. This is sug pear, and this was done on a hybrid pear rootstock. And I think I'm going to start using a Bradford type of rootstock. I'll start breaking these down. I'll break these down because then it forces the apical dominant hormones to the top branch. But you can see that these haven't produced much growth up here. This pear rootstock is also highly susceptible to fire blight, and I've had some struggles with it too. I've had a lot of fails on this one. About 1/4 of my grafts have ended up failing. It wasn't the graft that failed, it was the fact that either the rootstock died or the something along this died and didn't thrive. But this doesn't seem to be thriving very well. And I did all these back in March, about 3 months ago. Okay, now here's one that was done on M111 by Mr. Larry Stevens when I went to go up there to interview him. And you see how much this thing has grown. This plant is definitely ready to go out into the orchard. And I probably got 2 foot of growth. M111 is a large rootstock. And it's less susceptible to fire blight. And it's doing really well for us. Really proud of how that looks. Looks great. Actually, no, this is not on a M111. This is on seedling. So this is going to make a full-size tree. So there's a lot of vigor in this. It's these seedling rootstocks, they want to get up real big. You'll probably get a 30, 40 foot tree out of this apple tree whenever it's fully grown, but it's doing really well. And I can't wait to hurry up and put that one out into the orchard and see what it does for us. That variety is called Jim Day. That's a southern apple variety that almost nobody is collecting, but we're going to be propagating. Everything that I'm putting out in my orchard from here, these are going to be mother plants that I'm going to be taking cuttings from and making grafts and getting out to the community. Let's head on over and let's look at some of the other rootstock that I did 6 weeks ago. All right, so right here behind me is apple rootstock that I grafted 6 weeks ago. We did this graft series on G41. G41 is a little bit more vigorous, makes a little bit bigger tree, and actually about a 3/4 size tree. So it's a good size tree. And it's also fire blight resistant. Now, the ones that I did here 6 weeks ago, these look much better than the M27s that I did. So, lesson learned, right rootstock for the right area. But you can see just in 6 weeks how much growth I'm getting on these. That's double the growth that I'm getting on the M27 over there. So I'm much happier with the performance of these rootstocks. So now that I've got a healed graft union, the rubber bands are falling off by themselves, I'm getting good growth up here, I can come along here with the snips and we can start snipping all this lower growth off. And as soon as we get rid of this lower growth, it'll cause more energy to be focused up here on the scion wood that we want to grow. So I've got about 100 of them that I did over here. Now, if you noticed, I've got a little section right here. These are my failed graft unions. I've had the entire rootstock die, which means there probably wasn't good root systems in there, is the reason that those died. The ones that I had a few that whenever I was going through grafting, I had hardly any roots on. So that's expected when you're ordering large bundles. They're going to throw some of those in there with it. But on some of these, the graft union failed, but the rootstock is still growing. And I'll allow these to grow, and then I can come back in here, like right now, it's the middle of summer. It's a good time to do some bud grafts, so I can go get some good, clean bud wood off of my growing apple tree and just do a bud graft right in here on this stalk and see how that takes. Or I can wait till next spring or when it's coming out of dormancy, and then I can graft onto this wood right in here and reuse these rootstocks for next year. So it's up to the person and whether they have time, they want to bother with it. But the rest of these are looking really good. All these in here, these are all shell. I've got about 100 of them. But all these grafts are looking really good. I'm getting some good growth. So hopefully in a couple of months, by the end of summer, going into fall, I'll have some good growth on these and I can start moving these out and getting these out to the public. So if you're looking for a good southern variety of apple, we're zone 8B here. We get about 500 chill hours. I can't speak highly enough about how well shell performs. I got some nice big apples off of my mother tree this year. Stuff that you would buy in the grocery store that has nice big primo grade 1 apples is that's what I was pulling off of my tree this year. All right, now let's move on and I want to show you some grafts that I did 3 years ago on some wild Bradford pear seedling that grew up wild in this pasture right here behind me. So let's move on over there and I'll show you. So when I first decided I wanted to try my hand at grafting, I found a wild seedling Bradford pear that was growing up along this fence line right here behind me. And it happens to be growing right on the property line. So I said to myself, I was like, well, if I graft that, then the landowner over here is less apt to come along and bush hog this because it's right in the fence row. The only thing I got to worry about is if he wants to come in here and clean out his fence row, he may end up taking that out. But, you know, for an experimental graft, I took my chances. I had zero cost invested into this, other than just taking a piece of scion wood that I bought online and then just threw a piece out here. So right here behind me is I have Florida 5845. This is called Killer Pear, and it's called Killer Pear because it's supposed to be killer good. And I grafted this one. Actually, it's this one. This is the very first one that I grafted. Grafted it down here. You see that seedling come up on my side of the fence row. But I grafted this one 3 years ago. And so for 3 years, it grew, and now it's probably 10 foot tall up there. So you can see the top of it right up there. And I've come along here a year or two ago. I took some cuttings, and so I've already used this as scion wood that I've propagated from, and I've used scion wood from here to go out into other wild seedlings that are growing out here, and do some more propagating on my neighbor's property. The following year, so this tree right here, this is a 3-year-old tree, and I don't know how long it's going to be before it starts bearing fruit, but I'm 3 years into it. Hopefully another year or two, I'll start getting fruit off of this. So the following year, 2 years later, I come along right next to it, and there's another seedling coming up, and I put in 2 scion woods of Golden Boy, one here and one here. And you can see I've got a V crotch right there, is a potential weak point. So this is not anything that I want to keep. Take that out of there. The rest of this is Golden Boy. So you can see Golden Boy is 3 foot taller than the other one right next to it. So that's Killer Pear right here. This is Golden Boy. And I'm probably got a 15-foot tree right here. And I'm just letting this thing grow way on up. I can come in with a step ladder, and then I can start taking scion wood. But all these little leaf nodes all along could potentially turn into branches, and then I'm going to take scion cuttings from this in the future, and I can use to propagate with. So this is just a wild seedling. It has the potential to produce a huge tree, and it would just give me unlimited amount of scion wood that I can propagate from my nursery. And so I'm excited about that. Now I know you can't really see it, but right over in there is one scion wood I did 2 years ago, but it's also Golden Boy, and it's growing up right in the woods over there. But that's about where it's at. Right here next to it, that is a wild Bradford. That big tree right there. I could come in here and put another variety on right there, and right over there is another one. So this whole pasture out here is full of wild Bradford pear that came from the Bradford pear tree that was planted on our property before we bought the property. And those are going away this year. We're having those dug up. All right, so let's move on, and I'll show you other updates to other grafts that I did 2 years ago. Okay, so right here beside me, just over the fence line on my neighbor's property, is a graft that I did 2 years ago. And I've got it labeled, and I think this one is Southern Bartlett. So that's a nice soft southern variety of pear. But I made a cut right in here a year ago too, and then from that I've got 5 shoots of growth that have come up, and I can use all of that as scion wood this upcoming winter I can harvest all that wood. But my neighbor also has free pears, and eventually this is going to start fruiting, and then the deer can eat these pears, or he and his family can come out and harvest these pears. But that's one of the best things about this, is he's agreed for me to come over here and graft all these wild seedlings, and he gets free pears and I get free scion wood. So that's a great situation. I've done another one right over here, is another same thing. I think that's southern bartlett right over there. Let's go on around and let's show you some more. All right, so last spring I came along and I found another rootstock just over the property line here, and this is across our new property. And then you can see my neighbor's ATV trail right here. He comes up and down. He just kind of rides his property. But in between his trail and our property, I had this wild seedling Bradford pear that was coming up, and I grafted it over. This is Golden Boy. This was done 1 year ago, so this is last spring. I had all this growth, and I came along and I harvested a few scion cuttings that I did some grafting of for my nursery. And so look at all that wood that has grown this year. Everything that has grown this year can be used as scion wood for this upcoming grafting season over the winter. I got one more of these Bradford pear that I want to show you that I just did a few months ago. So this year I did these. So we come on down just a couple of feet. What are we, 30 feet from that last one? And then right in here was a Bradford pear that was coming up, and I put in, let me see if I can read that. I can't read it right now, but this was a new variety that I acquired this year, and I put one of the scions out here. But it's going pretty good. Just in 1 year, every bit of that is all new growth. So this will probably grow a couple more feet before the dormant season hits, and then again I can use all of that wood to propagate from, and it'll continue coming back, and eventually, 5-6 years it'll start producing pears. So he can drive up on his ATV and pick pears, and the deer can walk up and down this trail and eat these pears also. So let's go on down another 25 feet. And I think the last variety was Biscamp. And this is another variety. I can't read that one either. But if you look, all the leaves have been stripped off of this. So I believe the deer have come along and have nibbled this pear tree, because there's several branches of wood that has been growing there. That's okay. They're just giving them a little trim. Everywhere that they nibble off, it'll end up putting off more shoots of growth. So we're going to get more shoots of growth out of all that, and then again we'll be using some of that as scion wood for the nursery next year. All right, now I did some grafting back last year on a peach tree, so let's go to our front orchard and let's show you the results of that one graft. Sure has been hot here lately. This past week was the hottest week that we've had so far, and hopefully it'll be the hottest week of the year. Our heat index yesterday was 111, and we were out here trying to do some stuff, and I was just drenched in sweat. But it is definitely time for summer hibernation, where I go inside and I wait for the cooler temperatures to come. But it's about 83 degrees right now, and about 90% humidity because it just rained last night. That hair is very thick and heavy, and it's probably 100-degree heat index right now. This is my apple tree, my mother apple tree. This is shell. I take a lot of my scion wood cuttings from that. You've probably seen that in previous episodes. Now, here's a peach tree. I did this peach tree last year, this time. Well, it's probably 16 months ago that I grafted. But I had Florida Best. Florida Best always wants to bloom right before we get a hard freeze, and I end up losing all the peaches off of it. So I've grafted on other varieties. And if you look right down here at that big this big graft union right here. This was done last spring. I did a bark graft, and you can go back and look at that video in my history. And that's 1 year's growth. So it grew most of that last year, and then it also grown some of it this year. But I've got a lot of growth on that. That's because I had a large vigorous rootstock that was pushing a lot of growth. And so when you have a vigorous rootstock that's ready to go, your grafts are also going to end up being large. All right guys, that's going to do it for this update video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if this is your first time watching. Remember, keep growing, keep building, and always keep adventuring. Together, we're Farmington Famous, and we'll see you next time.